It's episode 103, gearing up to the launch of the Radio Times, but previously on the British Broadcasting Century. Across summer 1923, the BBC has evolved from 6 local stations suffering bruising attacks from government and press to an inquiry-conquering, government-backed, better-funded service with new and improved Simultaneous Broadcasting, which plays one station's programme through other stations via landline throughout the land. So now that it can simultaneously broadcast, what will it simultaneously broadcast? And isn't it time there was a listings magazine giving us the times for radio? This time, the stage almost set for the Radio Times. Also, the Rob Roy broadcast from Edinburgh, other dramas as well, radio's first cat, and the fallout from this simultaneous broadcasting idea. Would it have an effect on local stations? An issue still with us today, and our guest this time in the present day, with his album of reconstructed, rearranged, re-recorded themes from across the century, Gavin Sutherland joins us, telling us about classics like this. And this. And this. The album is called The Next Programme Follows Shortly. It's made with Fast Tunes Limited. It's out now, and Gavin Sutherland is here to tell us more. That and the tale of late August to late September 1923, here on episode 103 of the British Broadcasting Century.
Hello, this is Paul Carenza calling.
This is London calling.
Hello, Guildford calling. Paul Carenza here. Thank you for joining us on this moment-by-moment origin story account of British broadcasting. This episode, lots to pack in. Gavin Sutherland joins us, lots of tunes from him and tales behind the tunes. Plus, as we bring you the long story of how British broadcasting came to be what it is, we're going to try and cram in about a month's worth of stuff. Sometimes we loiter on 1 or 2 single days, but we've had the big moments of simultaneous broadcasting, sending one station's programme nationally. We've had the Sykes report and how that affected the relationship between government and BBC, and of course ultimately listeners. I suppose they're involved as well. And then next episode we're going to launch the Radio Times. We have a previous episode about the Radio Times, but we're going to bring you new stuff next time as well. So this episode kind of lands between simultaneous broadcasting, late August 1923, and the launch of the Radio Times a month later, in late September 23. So lots of little things happened. We're going to give you a snapshot of all of it. Let's start with some music and our guest, shall we? And that person is Gavin Sutherland.
A long-standing friend of mine called Martin Fenton, former BBC engineer, lecturer, general, knowledgeable person about the techniques of broadcasting, as well as then the programmes and the history, whereas I was the history and the musical side of it, then the techniques, then the programmes at the end. We fell to talking when we first met on an internet forum back in the dim and distant past when all this was fields. And we had always harboured a desire, because he knew that I recorded CDs regularly of mainly British music. But television music and broadcasting music from the UK was something that I had always loved since I was a wee boy, and had sort of saved in my private store all these pieces that I wanted to find, record, know more about, and know more about broadcasting in general as a result. Just before lockdown, I got the phone call. He said, right, here's the green light, we're on. And I said, right, what are we going to record? He went, I don't know. So we essentially had about 2 weeks of brainstorming. We threw out at least 150 titles, saying we'd do those on volumes 2 to 11, on the hope that volume 1 sells. There was only one piece that we actually needed to record, which is a piece that we kind of bonded historically on, which is a piece called Midlands Montage, written for ATV. And then around that, there were 2 pieces I'd already recorded but had no release, which were the music that started Tyne T's television in the morning, called Three Rivers Fantasy. Being from the Northeast, this was as much a part of my life as inhaling. And then I also had done Scotlandia, the STV version, which was used from the company's conception right up until I think the mid-80s, when another firm took it over. And I found out over time that there were hundreds and hundreds of broadcast history enthusiasts, not unlike yourself.
We know a few. We know a few around these parts. Yes, indeed, there are.
And that's what brought the project to fruition. Although I wasn't expecting it to be done in Abbey Road with a stellar band, and also that literally not one piece of the music that you hear on that disc exists anymore, because as is the way with all of this old music, it gets thrown out, it gets binned, there's flood damage to libraries and so on. So I had to reconstruct 52 items, and we recorded it in 2 days and had the best time. We were in Abbey Road 2. Yeah. In Abbey Road 1, they were recording the score for the new Aliens film, and the musicians coming out of Studio 1 looked miserable as sin. So what are you recording? Oh, we've just recorded Grandstand. What? Why wasn't I called for this session?
Exactly. Well, too right. I bet they were. Well, we've alluded to what the project is. Let's state it quite clearly then. It's a CD, and I have it. If this were a visual medium, one could see it. Gavin Sutherland. The next programme follows shortly with the Fast Tunes Orchestra. And it's how many tracks? 52 tracks, as you said. 52 Indeed. Tracks. So it's a mixture then of idents, theme tunes. There's some I've listened to it entirely, and it's a marvel. And you have a mix then of some things I was familiar with. You got a little bit of Two Ronnies and Bring Me Sunshine and all these things. And then some that I sort of feel like I recognise, and then some that I've never heard before in my life. But it's lovely to have it here, and you have a sense of nostalgia listening to it. It's a great selection.
That's the whole reason we did it, Paul. I think it was a collective assembly of things we liked, things we shared that we knew, and also just we had to put a few tracks in to kind of sell it, because otherwise it would be a project that we press 5 copies of and that'd be it. But interestingly, it's gained some interesting traction whilst we were making it from, as I say, many historians and lovers of old television. And of course, that's a major factor, as we know from your amazing work with the Century and, of course, everything else that you do.
I deny this thoroughly, but carry on. I will deny this compliment.
Post, is it? But I mean, track 1 tells you everything you need to know. We want to start with Here's Looking at You.
The first song on television, 26th of August 1936. That was heard as part of London's Radio Olympia event, showcasing television to the masses.
Reconstruction is a fairly simple medium. It's simply saturation listening to a recording, if one exists, and producing something as near to the original as possible. Now, sometimes you have to take some liberties, because sometimes you either don't have the fullest amount of musicians, or the recordings are atrocious. And Here's Looking at You, of course, was used for Radio Olympia, and the disc is bookended by that and a song called Television, which was actually the first song that was sung when the service opened for real. And so these 2 songs, all that existed was one pencil-drawn manuscript copy of the melody line of Television, and that was it. That's all that existed. Here's Looking at You has been chopped up variously by the BBC demonstration film and also by Pathé News, I think, who had some extracts of it. So bit by bit, you try and piece all that together, then try and make it one coherent whole to perform.
That footage I've seen, not considered, of course, that it's essentially becoming part of a jigsaw that you're having to piece together to assemble it. Wonderful. Plenty more from Gavin and his marvellous music yet to come. It'll be dotted throughout this episode. We're going to whiz through his album and whiz through the decades as we do so. In a moment then, we're going to go right back to August and September 1923 and tell you some of what was going on back then. But first of all, what have we been doing here in the present day? Well, I've been on the road a little bit. I've been doing the Isle of Wight for an evening of very old radio. Delight to be there with Tim Wonder, the Marconi historian. He hosted us there. And also spent some time with the family of Phyllis Twigg, the first radio dramatist and first TV cook. Looking through the Twigg archive, and there are many, many twiglets to be found there. It is quite marvellous. Camden Fringe, that's been lovely, and very shortly doing a workshop in Manchester about dramatising Lost Archive with the University of Loughborough. Also, walking tours of old BBC buildings, done some of that this summer, and we have at least one more yet to come in September. So if you'd like a meander around the streets of London, with particular attention drawn to where the BBC used to be, or even where pre-BBC broadcasting buildings used to be as well, have a look. The link is in the show notes, and you can join us September the 6th in this year of 2025. Elsewhere in today's BBC, I've been doing some Pause for Thoughts for Radio 2, Not Going Out, the BBC One sitcom. I've been co-writing that, and I've been doing some daily services for Radio 4 Extra, including, quite recently, Radio 4's Prayer for the Day turned 55 this summer, and I was asked to put together a daily service in tribute to Prayer for the Day's 55th birthday. So happy birthday from the oldest religious broadcasting slot in the world, to that young whippersnapper at just 55 years young. This is actually the 55th birthday of not just Prayer for the Day, but also the Radio 4 Sunday programme, and Thought for the Day, and Pause for Thought. They all turned 55 this year. Don't know what was happening 55 years ago to make all that happen, but something did, and they're all still here today. So that's sort of the day job, the broadcasting present. This broadcasting history project, though, has certainly taken over my life, if you couldn't tell already. I spend at least 2/3 of my time now researching, pod making, writing about all this. I'm still trying to write that novel. Yes, keep nagging me, and maybe this summer I'll get the first draft finished. If you'd like more information on all and any of this stuff, the quickest and fullest way to do that will be on Patreon. Always tell people there first, patreon.com/Paul Carenza, and that supports the podcast. It's £5 a month, and there's loads of videos, writings, and the like there. So do join us, and thank you so much to all of our patrons who support us there and keep this podcast afloat. On which, then, you don't want to hear any of this. You want to hear all about late August 1923, don't you, boys and girls? Leave a slight pause there for you to reply if you would like to. So the last couple of episodes, we've been looking at how the Sykes Inquiry, that first government report on the BBC, and simultaneous broadcasting, local transmissions becoming national via landline, both of these came to a head at the end of August 1923, within a couple of days of each other. 28th of August 23, we've not mentioned this particularly so far. Minor detail, but I quite like a minor detail now and then. John Reith, on that day, visits the Postmaster-General. That's Sir Laming Worthington Evans, great name. And Reith is requesting a delay to the Sykes Report's publication for the BBC to consider its position after this government inquiry. Postmaster-General agrees. And here's a nice little oddity. This all took place at the Postmaster-General's house in Oxted in Surrey, right next to the scene of the Cello and the Nightingale the year after. And the Postmaster-General made John Reith have his height measured on a wall at his house. Apparently, the PMG liked to record all of his visitors' heights on the wall as they walked through the door. Reith, being Reith, rather proudly wrote in his diary that he was the tallest of all of the visitors who had ever been to the Postmaster-General's house. And indeed, Reith got his way, and the report was delayed. Next day, 29th of August, for John Reith, it was a launch and a lunch. It was the launch of Simultaneous Broadcasting. We reported that last time. Reith read the 7 o'clock news bulletin. I only now spot, by the way, in Reith's diary, that he read the news again a week later. Why was that? Because Reith asked his mum to tune in on the 29th of August, and Mrs. Reith forgot. So she missed it the first time around, her darling John reading the news. So a week later, Reith said, right, I'll do it again. You've got to listen this time. Clearly, Reith is just going to keep reading the news until his mother finally listens. The luxury of power. So that was the launch. As for the lunch, this is a hint as to what is next. Earlier that same day, publishing baron Sir Frank Nunez had lunch with John Reith. They'd been liaising for weeks about Nunez's publishing business taking on what was then just called the BBC magazine. And of course, we know that would soon get its own title, the Radio Times. So this was the day of the agreement. Reith gleefully noted that he held out for a great deal and he got what he was after. Things were going well indeed for the great Scot. Reith would have a weekly column at first, even suggested he might personally take a share of the profits, but he refused. It was the BBC's magazine, not Reith's, even though it was his idea in response to the press ban of listings earlier that year. The next day, 30th of August, a dramatic moment in drama, as recalled by Arthur Burrows in his book The Story of Broadcasting. During the performance at the Regent Theatre, London, of Robert E. Lee, which I presume is a production of some sort, at one point in the act then being broadcast, a pistol was fired. Now, this had not been reckoned with, and before the controlling engineer was able to respond to the intensity of the sound, such a large amount of energy had been released that the choke coil of the transmitting station was overwhelmed and broke into flames. Could that be the first time ever that a gunshot has caused a fire in a completely different building due to wireless? That was an outside broadcast from a theatre in London's West End, but the next night there will be a drama in Scotland that would make history. This is the 31st of August 1923. While London was broadcasting a Westminster Abbey organ recital, still no mean feat, but the Glasgow station, 5SC, was showing what you can do in a studio. Not an outside broadcast, but one in a controlled setting. It was a rather boisterous adaptation of Rob Roy. Now, the BBC Yearbook and a later Director General even called this the first play specially written for broadcasting. I would, of course, take issue with this and argue that The Truth About Father Christmas by Phyllis Twigg did that the year before. But Rob Roy was perhaps the first adapted work from a book, we could say, apart from the early Shakespeare's, that was written for a grown-up audience, maybe. This is certainly before a formalised drama department, and everything's still a little bit ad hoc and one at a time. So Rob Roy was a favourite of Reith's, but the idea seems to have come on this occasion from R.E. Jeffrey, this early drama pioneer in Glasgow. He was there at the start at the Bath Street studios. He began with music, but then Jeffrey saw opportunities. He really was one of those people who saw that broadcasting had scope for doing so much more. He could bring drama into people's homes, and he was determined to make that happen. So rather than see audio productions as making do, a sort of a lesser version of a stage play, which I think some people saw, R.E. Jeffrey thought, well, let's use sound only for its benefits. What do they say? The pictures are better on the radio, and Jeffrey certainly believed that. He thought you could spark the imagination to make you feel immersively that you were actually there. So he dramatised parts of Walter Scott's heroic novel Rob Roy. Jeffrey lined himself up to play the title role, so he's writing it, directing it, producing it, and starring in it. Maybe it's ego, but more likely there's no one else to do it. Jeffrey's wife played Rob Roy's wife, Helen McGregor, but there would be further cast and crew. The band of the 1st Royal Scots Fusiliers deftly changed sides and supplied the warring pipe music. That's according to David Pat Walker in his marvellous book, The BBC in Scotland. Highly recommended. Also in the production, you had the Lyric Club Choir and 5SC's small studio orchestra. There were sound effects, live battle scenes. I mean, I don't know if you know Rob Roy, but it's a big production. And certainly a big one to be performed in this very, very early BBC with a studio and whatever cast they could find, whatever sound effects they could make. They'd be literally dragging passing people in from the corridor into the studio and making them part of this war scene. But Glasgow's Rob Roy was heralded as a major dramatic success at the BBC. It was the most ambitious radio drama so far, certainly. And the papers the next day said, "Striking new technique brought to life by actors." Head office in London caught wind of it. Reith thought it would be perfect to demonstrate simultaneous broadcasting. They would have to repeat it, though, which of course meant restaging it. Didn't record anything. So the band, the choir, the effects, the cast were all brought back again about a month and a bit later, and then that was broadcast across all stations and not just Glasgow. So this is the first non-London broadcast relayed across the country to other stations. R.E. Jeffrey as well had other dramas lined up for Glasgow, of course. He wasn't going to stop there. He did The Merchant of Venice later that week. But very soon, though, he would move on from Glasgow to be the first station director for Aberdeen, 2BD. That was the BBC's new station launching the 10th of October 1923. We'll have a whole episode about that very soon. Jeffrey would then leave Aberdeen a few months after that and head up the BBC's new dramatic department in London. So he's a key figure in radio drama in the early days. So August 1923 ended with this very early idea of simultaneous broadcasting then, but still the threat, I think it's fair to say, was very much the case that London was going to be the one to be broadcasting everywhere. This is from the Daily Herald, 31st of August 1923. Commencing in October, we intend to broadcast the whole of the Monday programme of 2LO to all stations. This announcement was made yesterday by an official of the BBC. The programme, he added, would probably take the form of a symphony concert. For the time being, items of general news will be broadcast to all stations from London at 7 and 9:15 each evening, the local stations adding their own local items at the conclusion of the general news. So London's dominance was growing, thanks to simultaneous broadcasting via landline, and Reith was certainly stamping a bit of authority. Early September, he hauled up from Cardiff one of my favourite station directors, the maverick Arthur Corbett Smith. Reith was not a fan, he was a bit of a loose cannon, gave him a good talking to. Very soon, Corbett Smith would be leaving Cardiff for a backroom office in London, where Reith could keep an eye on him, which meant, sadly, no more Cardiff Egg Week or operas written by himself. See our earlier episode if you want to hear just exactly how unusual, crazy and wonderful Arthur Corbett Smith was there in Cardiff. So elsewhere in September 1923, Reith sends the King a wireless set to try and convince him to do some broadcasting. Takes a little while to convince him there. There's a development too of the time signal. There's no Greenwich pips until 1924. But horologist Frank Hope Jones...
Here is Mr. F. Hope Jones, our time expert.
Well, he's been involved since April 1923. There was a broadcast.
I give you the exact time signal at the hour.
Hope Jones spoke about daylight saving, and at the end of it, he counted down the hour.
I shall do it by counting out the last 5 seconds of the hour. Stand by. Are you ready?
So we knew exactly what the hour was.
The last 5 seconds of the hour, and the last one will be the exact hour. Pip, 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 pip.
Soon after that, in spring of 23, the usual Westminster chimes had been abandoned. There'd be no more striking on the bells they'd hired in for the London Symphony Orchestra. Instead, announcers started copying Frank Hope Jones and counting down the last 5 seconds of the hour, and they would tap a single bell on the hour. So all of the provincial stations were starting to do this, and they realised the importance of the proper time, that actually this was a public service that radio could offer. So they started installing properly timed clocks. There'll be a master clock and what's called a slave dial. You can Google it for details. I'm not a clock guy. From the North Star newspaper, 23rd of August 1923. Some facts concerning the new clocks with which the provincial stations of the Broadcasting Company are now being fitted may be of interest. Everybody likes to know the exact time, hence the new advantage according to listeners in. At each broadcasting station there is now being fitted a synchronome master clock and a dial indicating seconds only just over the transmitting microphone. This dial is normally dead, but as a result of the speaker turning a switch shortly before any hour or half hour when announcing that he intends to give the time, the seconds hand will make one revolution, second by second, during the last minute. The first 30 or 40 ticks, which will be fairly loud, will serve as a warning to the announcer, who will then chime in with them whenever he likes, counting out loud to 59 and then striking the hour on a steel tube or gong by hand. The main master clock was corrected daily by adding or taking away small weights based on the precise time the radio station had received from the Eiffel Tower time signal. By the start of the next year, Greenwich took over with its time signals, the pips. Speaking of time, I think it's time we returned to Gavin Sutherland, our guest this episode. He's the musical maestro behind the album The Next Programme follows shortly.
1959, television came to the northeast, where I was born and brought up. Now, I wasn't around in 1959, but from the very first day, the Independent Television Authority insisted that all of the 15 regions had to have an identity of their own. And you could either use traditional melodies, or you could have a piece written, or whatever. Another snapshot of where music was at that time. It's a massive amount of light music delight. So you had Eric Coates, who wrote, I think, at least 3 pieces for different television companies. Richard Addinsell wrote Southern Rhapsody for Southern Television. And Arthur Wilkinson, a much, much understated arranger who worked closely with Tyne Tees in the early days and actually died of overwork in 1968. Having been born in London and yet was able to turn up a 4-minute medley of some of the great, well-known tunes to all of us in the Northeast. It was so easy to reconstruct this piece because I'd known it all my life. It wrote itself quite simply.
It's interesting you mentioned there about some of those composers, Eric Coates and Richard Addinsell, and that, who I think of them as classical composers of these important, significant pieces. And these are, of course, important and significant in a very different
Yeah.
way. But yeah, they contribute to so much to the 20th century pop culture in terms of TV and the like.
Absolutely. I mean, this was the pop music of its day. You know, the tree of musical styles had not branched out to the millions and millions of things you have on option nowadays. It was quite simply, the end of the operetta and a rather nationalist sound of traditional British music, whether heavyweight like Elgar and Bax and Delius and Ireland and Holst and Walton, or the lighter end like Coates or Farnan. All right, he was Canadian, but he is considered English light music, and Adin Sell. They were sort of in the middle of the century. And then it then got passed to people initially like Ron Goodwin, and then on through into the 60s and 70s with people like Johnny Pearson. You see almost a history of British light music through British television. It's extraordinary.
Cool, that's like a whistle-stop tour through the century. I feel like I've had a little taste of all of it there. So, are there any other particular ones? We got the Sweeney, the Coronation Street. I played these in the house on the weekend, and my family didn't know what I was putting on, so they just thought this just nice background music going on. So they go, "Is that Coronation Street?" Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
Deal with it.
Doing Coronation Street, I'd already done quite a lavish orchestral arrangement of Coronation Street about 10 years ago. But it was an orchestral one. It wasn't faithful to the version we all know and love. And funnily enough, I know the current guy that plays the trumpet solo on that. He wasn't in our session and was rather kicking me that he wasn't, but we couldn't afford him, film star salaries and all that. But I want to do Coronation Street for one reason only, and that is the little bumper that goes into the ad break. I want to record that. So I just stuck it on the end. I love Eric Spear said he had no idea. He was a Londoner, again. How would he write a piece about Lancashire? So he went on the train up to Manchester where they were proposing it and doing early film tests and whatever. And he said, I was taken to this little backwater, as he called it, which was Hume, I think, Cheadle Hume, if I remember rightly. And he said, the sun on the cobbles, the rainy cobbles, and the sun came out over it. And I just heard this tune and I went back to the office and I wrote it down.
It endures today. Absolutely wonderful. I love the fact that you see the sleeve notes here. Track 10, ABC. I was today years old, you say, when I discovered these are the notes A, B, and C. Wow, look at that.
There you go, you see.
I'm blown.
The guy that wrote the programme notes is currently employed by the BBC. His name's Al Dupre, and he's a continuity announcer in Cardiff. And his claim to fame is anytime there's a break in the snooker, he always goes on, and he has such a great sort of almost surreal stream of words to say. He's so good. He's so loved by BBC Wales audiences. But he is also a broadcasting history nut like all of us. And he said, if you're going to do this, please can I write the programme notes? I said, yes, you write what you want. And brilliant. I love the fact that some of them are literally him discovering stuff because we all share what we know. And I like that little community as well,
Oh, it's a treasure trove here.
I made about 110 CDs over 30 odd years. I'd say this is the one of which I'm probably the most proud.
We've not even mentioned you've done all this work with the English National Ballet as principal guest conductor and the like. In the early days, we see it. We talked a lot on the podcast about Peter Eckersley and Arthur Burrows and the like going highbrow versus lowbrow. And I can see here your CV is full of the highbrow, and if I may delightfully celebrate the lowbrow in this, it's a marvelous thing,
The first thing we actually recorded was Grandstand. And all of the production crew came down to listen to the playthrough. And at the end of it, I turned around and there's tears, and you think, you forget this. Music can still do that.
And a theme like that, absolutely. I mean, I'm not even a sports fan, and yet Grandstand's probably the one that speaks to me most of all of those things, and
I still like David Quantick's lyrics. Do you like sport? Do you like sport? Do you like sport? Yes, we like sport. How did that piece of music automatically make you think we're in for an afternoon of football or golf or show jumping or horse racing or whatever? And yet it did. How did the two Ronnies, a tiny little theme of music, how did that end up in making you know you were going to have an evening of wordy fun with two very fine comic actors. Here's a little trade secret. On the front of the manuscript, there's one page of the manuscript exists in the BBC Library. Lots of other stuff, but only one page of the full score of Ronnie Hazelhurst. And on the front, it says Ronnie's B and C. Now, the first chord of the two Ronnies is C minor. It's got a sharp 7 in it, but it's a C minor chord. The next chord is a B flat major chord. So C minor, Ronnie Corbett, a minor person, C, Barker, B flat major.
Oh.
Now that's deep, but that's what he did. It wasn't always just setting the theme, and of course he used the two-syllable word Ronnie. Da, da,
Gosh, I feel like you've just found the Da Vinci Code hidden in amongst the two Ronnies theme.
Of all things.
Yeah, it was there all along, staring us in the face.
Low brow and proud, Paul.
Absolutely. Well, that's the spirit. And we'll hear more from Gavin at the end of this episode. But we've got September 1923 to tell you about, leading up to the launch of the Radio Times. Another thing we're building up to at this point is the launch of the Sheffield relay station. That's the first time the BBC had a relay station, but at this point they're very eager to give some sort of broadcasting to Sheffield, a bit of a gap in the land. For now, the 3rd of September 1923, this from the Sheffield Independent. Mr. F. Lloyd and his son, Mr. Harry Lloyd, are making great improvements in broadcasting for the benefit of listeners in the Sheffield district. A programme sent from their station in Ventnor Place, Sheffield last night was heard clearly by many people in the vicinity, even those with only the most modest of crystal sets. As Mr. Lloyd broadcast at the conclusion of one song, "We must not rest until every home in Sheffield has the advantage of listening to such music. Wireless will do it, and it is worth working for." As for the music involved, Mrs. Dorothea Rogers, who has a delightfully clear voice, admirably suited to broadcasting, sang accompanied by Mrs. Smith. Uncle Frederick contributed a violin solo, and the staff sang "Son of My Soul." So that's an insight into Sheffield bumbling and rumbling along its way before it formalised and before it became officially part of the BBC. More of that soon enough. We'll do a whole episode about this coming up because Andrew Barker, our newspaper detective, has been doing a deep dive into what was going on in Sheffield and how this relay station came about. This looks like something that no one has ever properly looked into, so I commend Andrew hugely for that. But for now, I know what you want to know about, and that is the next day, the 4th of September 1923. It's the first cat on the air. Tishy, the cat of the Birmingham Broadcasting Station, is said to be the first cat to broadcast in England. From the Leicester Mercury. The incident occurred just when Mr. Robert Parker had finished the concluding bars of his number in I Pagliacci. "Ring up the curtain," he sang. At this, Tishy, who had walked across the studio and stopped beneath the microphone, raised his voice and gave vent to a really transistable bar. Sounds more like a sheep to me. Anyway, a day later, 5th September 1923. Bit of a mystery here. Wireless Weekly says, "We understand that the new 2LO announcer, about whom we made some comments recently, has been relieved of his duties. The announcer represents the BBC. The company is wise in considering the public's wishes in these matters." Love to know more about that, I thought when I read it. Thank you, Andrew Barker, for sending it over. So I scoured previous issues of Wireless Weekly to find out what this rogue announcer was all about. And I think this is what they're referring to. This article from the 22nd of August 1923 in Wireless Weekly. "The absence of familiar voices from 2LO raises a point which is of interest not only to the BBC, but to the tens of thousands who've learnt to appreciate the pleasant voices of the three chief uncles." Now that would be Uncle Arthur, Uncle Rex and Uncle Caractacus. Arthur Burrows, Rex Palmer, Cecil Lewis. Maybe were absent from the air as life got busier behind the scenes. "During the past week, we've been listening to a cultured, clear and refined voice from 2LO, but a voice which lacks youthfulness, personality and enthusiasm. The announcer is just as much a performer as any artiste. The work of announcing is not, or should not be, merely a mechanical drone. The announcer at 2LO, to thousands of listeners, represents the British Broadcasting Company. In fact, he is the British Broadcasting Company. He is the only one with whom the public are in touch. He should be sympathetic, cheerful, and above all, interested in his work. He should possess a sense of humour, and what is best described as a young voice. We cannot see the announcer. Our whole impression of him is gained by the quality of his voice. The voice of Mr. Burrows, for example, carries with it an impression of virility, keenness, and a suggestion of fresh breezes on the moors. Well, that's beautifully put, isn't it? I actually had a Zoom call this week with Arthur Burrows' grandson and great-granddaughter, who didn't really know anything about Arthur Burrows, let alone him starting the BBC, until they found this podcast about 6 months ago. So it's been lovely to chat with them. They will be guests on the podcast later this year, but I'll have to let them know that their great-granddad and granddad carried with him an impression of virility, keenness, and a suggestion of fresh breezes on the moors.
The night shall be filled with music.
Mr. Palmer.
It was still pretty hectic in those early days.
And Captain Lewis.
All the things that Reith was doing eventually began to overflow onto us. So I just walked out.
Also possess attractive voices. But the new voice, which has appeared, leaves us cold. So that will be who they're referring to, and Wireless Weekly are then clearly celebrating on the 5th of September that this announcer has been, in their words, relieved of his duties after their comments. Well done, you got someone sacked. Elsewhere, 10th of September 1923, John Reith has named this BBC magazine. Everything is now in shape, and from various alternatives, I chose Radio Times for the title. Various alternatives. Wonder what they were. History does not record them. TV Quick? Who can say? Radio Times was the name. 2 days after that, a big simultaneous broadcast from Sir Ernest Rutherford. This was seen as a milestone in radio development, according to one newspaper. It was an outside broadcast from Liverpool that was simultaneously broadcast by all of the main stations then existing. This is Sir Ernest Rutherford, the president of the British Association, the first official to simultaneously broadcast, the first time you could hear a notable voice throughout the land. By notable voice, I'm not including John Reith reading the news, mainly for his mum. From the Sphere newspaper. The experiment by which Sir Ernest Rutherford's address on the structure of the atom, delivered at the meeting of the British Association at the Philharmonic Hall, Liverpool, was heard from end to end of the British Isles simultaneously, is an achievement unsurpassed by any other country. Concealed among the flowers in front of the speaker was the microphone, a small gauze-covered disc 6 inches across. Ah yes, so this ties in with other early broadcasts when you want to conceal the microphone. You don't want the live audience to know that actually this is being heard elsewhere. You don't want them to think there's been some sort of experiment going on. You want them to focus on who is speaking. In this case, there was actually a second audience in a different building. So they had a line going through to the Technical Institute down the road, and there was another packed audience there hearing Sir Ernest Rutherford from afar. Quite revolutionary at the time. The astonishing fact remains that all over England, Scotland and Ireland, the speech would be heard in 1/50th of a second, whereas the voice, travelling through the atmosphere in the hall, would take 1/5 of a second to reach the seats at the back. How intriguing. You could hear it at home quicker than they could hear it in the room. Said to have been heard in Belfast and at stations in Dublin and Amsterdam and Brussels and Paris. The newspaper saying that the speech was like lightning, broadcasted within the twinkling of an eye. This from the Coatbridge Express newspaper. The success of the experiment was such that in about a fortnight's time, not merely speeches, but the best music at the several broadcasting centres will be exchanged or simultaneously broadcast supplementary to the local programmes. National music coming soon. All that being said about how wonderful and romantic and incredible and inventive this broadcast was, reaching people in a blink of an eye, the Aberdeen Press and Journal took issue with the content of what was being said. I wonder how many people with wireless sets in Aberdeen listened in last night to the presidential address of Sir Ernest Rutherford at the British Association. London enthusiasts are complaining bitterly. They had to listen for an hour and a half to a dissertation they could not understand. The broadcasting people have promised that never again will there be a reoccurrence of such a thing. They themselves admit that they did not expect it to last so long. It was an experiment they were making in simultaneous broadcasting throughout the country, and they're satisfied to leave it at that. I find that marvellously intriguing, that they chose a speaker thinking, oh yes, everyone would love to hear him, but they didn't want to hear him for an hour and a half. Here's someone I do want to hear more from, though, and that is our guest, Mr. Music, Gavin Sutherland.
You were the first port of contact because I thought if anybody's going to want to know about this, for better or for worse, it's you, because of your amazing work with your podcast and your historical delves. I mean,
not at all.
2022 was fantastic for me. I was, biting your hand off to get more content on your social media every day. And it was
bless you.
I think we all have to keep sharing what we know or our interest in this, because we are the last carriers of these torches. And when we stop doing it or think of something else, then that's it. This stuff will not be around forever. And sadly, I feel the landslide behind me of people who just want to have selective remembrance about this stuff, whereas in fact, the richest history. Was it Eyewitness, those CD sets from the BBC archives? They're phenomenal.
Yeah, golden.
And I always go back to them. And that's one small example. It can't be allowed to fade like a Radio Luxembourg 60s show. It has to stay around.
Well, I'm glad you said it, because you're right. And I would encourage anyone listening as well, if you've got if there's a spark of any different little niche of broadcasting history, think, oh, I'd love to look into more of that thing. Do it, and be the person, be the guy, be the girl who knows about that thing, because we come calling on you, because we can't do it all, so I know
this is the point.
That there are people
it's that
experts
Indiana
in
Jones
that
film where the woman gains all the knowledge in the world and her head explodes because you simply can't hold all that knowledge. You're right. But the fact is, now with this wonderful technology, God, I sound like I'm about 100. We can all share, and we can all. It's like for the techies, it's like torrents. We can essentially send and share everything, make this huge historical database. Not literally, but we can all share it. And there are organisations like Kaleidoscope, Transdiffusion, Missing Believe White, yourself, the Test Card Circle, must give them a plug, the Light Music Society, all these organisations that have people who scratch that itch. And you put it all into one pot, and there it is for everybody to enjoy, or just us to continue to enjoy. But if one person gets added to the list, it's one more of us, one less of them.
Yeah. No, absolutely, too right. And what's been lovely about the podcast, which I hadn't foreseen when we started it, was, we did an interview recently with the guy who knows almost everything there is to know just about the early Savoy bands on the BBC, Savoy bands, And he is like, there were like two of them. There's two guys who just doing that, that's their thing. We've got Andrew Barker, our newspaper detective, just devouring every newspaper, mentioning broadcasting on a day-by-day basis. You've got Tim Wonder, who's like the Marconi guy. He's particularly about the pre-BBC. So, and there's all these different people, Kate Murphy, who's all about, Hilda Matheson and the early women at the BBC, and just absorbing all that stuff, and a chance to bring them together here and interview one and interview another. And then someone hears that and goes, oh, yeah, that helps my research on this other thing. And great. Of
course, things like online resources already, like the Gillard Project and the ACTT stuff, they're vital as well. This is the point, and we all share it.
Where's the best place to get the CD then?
So let's do this two ways, because at the minute you can get it on eBay. Simply type in the next program follows shortly, and you can see that it's available on CD or vinyl, a double vinyl album, and also there's a little EP of idents, and they're all available through the Fast Tunes eBay shop. You can also go to Fast Tunes Limited on Facebook or on Blue Sky. And, I hope everybody gets as much fun out of it.
Thank you for it. It's a marvel. Gavin Sutherland. The next programme follows shortly. Do get it now. I have it. You've heard it. You need it. Before we go this time, we're meant to be bringing you up to the start of the Radio Times for the next episode. So just to fill in a few more days, mid-September 1923, there's a few insights into Newcastle station 5NO. Now, this station had a director called Bertram Fryer, very popular. He replaced the original station director in Newcastle, who's called Tom Payne. And here he is.
Mr. Thomas wouldn't stand for more than an hour broadcasting in the evening at first. I said, but we'll have to have more, Mr. Thomas. He said, no, I can't get my transmitter. It'll have to be got ready. And he wouldn't do more than an hour. I wasn't allowed to order him. I was BBC. He was Marconi.
Now, Reith had sacked Tom Payne, the walking violinist, after hearing odd reports about him.
We had a different concert every night. People are already ringing up saying, why don't you get a change, Mr. Payne? I said, what do you want, Lockhart's Elephants or something like that,
So Reith sent Deputy Programme Director Cecil Lewis to Newcastle to see what's what, and Lewis found Tom Payne shaving in his office at 10 a.m. A sackable offence. So unfortunately Payne left, and Bertram Fryer had replaced Tom Payne and done rather well at Newcastle. But Bertram Fryer wanted to go south, and so Reith lined up Fryer as the new Bournemouth station director in mid-September 1923. So who would take over Bertram Fryer as the Newcastle station director? Reith lined up his own brother-in-law, Ernest Rutherford. Yes, Reith's reading the news for his mum and getting his brother-in-law to run Newcastle. 13th of September is when Bertram Fryer left Newcastle with a leaving present given to him by members of the Fairy Flower League. This is the Newcastle version of the Radio Circle, the children's club. Now, our newspaper detective, Andrew Barker, reckons Newcastle may have taken the Fairy Flower League name from a talk given on the station the previous month, 26th of August, by the actual British Fairy League. Yes, a League of Fairies. Big thing at the time. Some believed in it, some liked the stories. Either way, they're on the air. So the Fairy Flower League was then the name for the children's club in Newcastle, and then the Bournemouth station also ended up having the Fairy League for their children's club too, because of course Bertram Fryer went from Newcastle to Bournemouth, and so the Fairy Flower League blossomed. Bertram Fryer was such a popular station director that Newcastle listeners who missed him actually started investing in valve radio sets, more powerful. That way they could hear, bless them, his output all the way from Bournemouth to the northeast of England. The Bournemouth station then would open soon, so there were mentions of that in newspapers that month. Also mentions we've not given to you of the Aberdeen station, that was coming soon, and the Sheffield relay station, that would come along soon enough as well. We will cover all of those in future episodes. Just know they were brewing at this time. But all of these local stations, how are they going to face off against Simultaneous Broadcasting, this kind of national programme sent from London? Well, the wireless press at the time knew this was a battle to be had. Wireless Weekly.
We know that many readers, particularly provincial readers, view with a certain amount of alarm the possibility of simultaneous transmission depriving them of an undue proportion of entertainment from their local station, for which they naturally have the highest regard. Enthusiasts in Northumberland and Durham maintain that 5&0 is quite the best of the stations, whilst those in South Lancashire and Cheshire will argue stoutly in favour of 2ZY. We feel sure the BBC will appreciate and value this regard too highly to jeopardise it by an unnecessarily frequent or unjustified use of simultaneous broadcasting.
Lastly then, to tee us up to next time, that same day in Wireless World magazine, 19th September 1923.
The British Broadcasting Company's new magazine. This new magazine, which the BBC is putting out, and I'm sure our readers will give it a hearty welcome as it fills a long-felt want, ought to be particularly valuable to the trade. It will print all the programmes of all stations a week ahead so that everyone can see exactly what is happening. The trade will be able to arrange demonstrations on a particular night,
and thus boost sales for radio sets. 21st of September, Reith has the rough copy of the first Radio Times, and he goes through the pages with Sir William Noble, former head of the Broadcasting Committee pre-BBC. Reith deems this magazine
really very good, and I hope it will keep up the standard.
1 week before, he had confirmed Leonard Crocombe, editor of Titbits, grandfather of Today programme's Justin Webb, as the first Radio Times editor. And next episode, we'll chat to one of the current editors of today's Radio Times, Shem Law. He joined us on episodes 75 and 76, telling us all about the history of the Radio Times. Next episode will focus more on the actual launch of it, but we'll also chat to Shem about his amazing career as editor of this fine mag, who once, by the way, called us Podcast of the Week. We thank you, Radio Times. And if you like this podcast, do share it, do rate and review us. If you haven't, we'd love some more ratings and reviewings. That would always be a marvellous thing. You can patronise us on Patreon for £5 a month and keep this afloat, because without that, there's no this. You can come and find me on tour. An evening of very old radio may be coming near you. See paulcarenza.com/tour for details, and see the show notes for more information of various links to do with this episode. Of course, I must close by saying
that original music is by Will Farmer, and the British Broadcasting Century is a solo-operated podcast, nothing to do with the BBC whatsoever. Any archive clips are so old they're public domain by now. Do share this podcast if you like it, and do find us on Facebook, X and Blue Sky. There's also coffee.com/paulcarenza, ko-fi.com/paulcarenza if you'd like to tip us a one-off thing. The price of a cup of coffee, perhaps. Thanks, Governor.
Thank you for listening. It's been a long episode, this one. You've done very well. Well done, you. We'll have another one for you soon on the launch of the Radio Times, here on the British Broadcasting Century.